Astrology and engineering aren't typically two things most of us would put together. Engineering is quantifiable science, while astrology is a little bit more whimsical. However, our guest this week has fully embraced both. This week, I am speaking with a fellow podcast host and scrappy mom of two kids. Every week, Susan Gates hosts Avoiding Average, Living Life Beyond the Ordinary, where she explores topics related to breaking free from your everyday routine and living life on your own terms. She's also a soul coach and astrologer who offers one-on-one coaching and even tarot card readings, which is awesome. So without further ado, let's welcome Susan to the Rebellion. Hi, Susan.
Hey Robin, how are you doing today? Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I think it's really cool when we talk about two things that people would consider sort of polar opposites, right? Science and astrology, engineering and astrology, that they're just so different. But honestly, I do see
Yeah.
a lot of magic in science, and I'm curious how you see it.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Honestly, I feel like growing up, I never would have seen myself going down the astrology path or like, the woo-woo side of things. And always been very focused on like, the scientific aspects and the scientific evidence and that sort of thing. Um, But really, I think once I've started diving into astrology a little bit more, I've noticed that there is a little bit of a science to it too. It's the study of, the planetary movements and how they influence things that we experience on a day-to-day basis. And so if you kind of think about it in that terms, like there are people who are constantly testing out theories that they have, maybe on a like a official scale like scientific experiments maybe, but it's the same sort of thing. And so I really love that aspect of it that you're constantly kind of learning and um, finding out new things.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because, when I explain to people that I do really think astrology is a thing, it's real, I believe in magic and all that kind of stuff, people are willing to accept that the moon controls our tides, right? They understand that the way
Hmm.
water moves is controlled by the moon. And human beings are made up of mostly water. So why wouldn't we
Yeah.
also be affected by the moon and its cycle? And I attribute a lot of power to full moons, and I'm someone who puts out a mason
Hmm.
jar of water every full moon so that I can harness that power with my moon water. But I think a lot of people just sort of
That's
roll
awesome.
their eyes and they think it's hokey junk. But to me, it just makes a lot of sense, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, yeah, and I think it's interesting too. It's like once you kind of start to track some of the things that are going on in astrology and how it plays out in your life too, some of it may seem like very mundane or very trivial, I guess, but it always has a tie back to what's going on in the cosmos too, which is, I think, the most fascinating part for me.
And ultimately, the study of the cosmos, astronomy too, that is a science-based field of study. And it's just I personally think that it's rooted a lot in sexism because astrology,
Mhm.
reading tarot, that is very much a woman's energy, right? That tends to be a very woman dominated
Mhm.
space, and I do think a lot of it is sort of brushed off, as with most of our hobbies, right? Like, I'll give you an example. Like,
Yeah.
I'm a huge Taylor Swift fan, huge Swiftie. I was following the Eras tour religiously. I was watching, on
Nice.
live streams. So I could see the surprise songs every night. I spent my life savings to go to the show. It was a thing. And I feel like a lot of men sort of made fun of the women who were very into the Eras tour in that way as it being silly and frivolous. Yet every Sunday, they put on a jersey for their favorite team and they're tailgating outside of a stadium, to continue their childhood hobby of being a sports fan. But when women have fun, frivolous hobbies, it's
Mhm.
seen as silly and not serious. But we're supposed to take their hobby serious. And I'm curious if you sort of see that relationship as well when it comes to things like astrology and tarot, that it's kind of brushed off and ignored because it tends to be something that women really are interested in.
See, that's a really interesting concept, and I love that analogy that you made with like Taylor Swift versus like football and all that. I think it's funny because like back in the day when astrology was like, you know, kind of first being um, developed, studied, like being really widely used, it was something that was, you know, mostly male dominated. Like a lot of these
Mhm.
things kind of started out, right? And now I think the thing that's kind of coming back in as far as like women bringing it back or women really being interested in it is that there is like a little bit more of an intuitive side to it. Like before, it was truly like a science. It was really, it went hand in hand with astronomy. Um, and and now I think the fact that like we're kind of able to use our intuition to help guide us in like doing some of these readings and things like that is really, I think, kind of ties into like the feminine aspect of it as well. Um, and so, sorry, I got off topic. um, and so I think it's it's really interesting, I guess, to see how it continues to play out. And there are definitely like astrologers out there. Um, one of my favorite people to kind of work with sometimes is male. And I think he does take it from like more of a scientific approach, like a very practical, oriented sort of thing. But then you have women out there who are, you know, diving into aspects like the dark feminine and things like Black Moon Lilith or like using asteroids and different things like that and really kind of expanding the subject. And so I think it's all very interesting to watch it unfold.
So, your podcast, Avoiding Average, Living Life Beyond the Ordinary, is such a fascinating topic to me because it's something that I can relate to tremendously. And I think especially moms can relate to this because I
Mhm.
do think that we go through a huge change when we have our first child, especially beyond just the normal, hormonal shift that we all go
Yeah.
through, but just your world is changed in ways
Mhm.
you didn't expect. Before I went on maternity leave, if anyone had asked me, are you coming back after? Of course I'm coming back to work. Like, what are you talking about? I've been here for over 10 years. I love my job. I will see
Mhm.
you at the end of my maternity leave. I had my baby, and I was like, oh my God, I never want to go back to my old job. It just no longer felt right for me. And I've had to
Yeah.
figure out what is right for me. And you go on this sort of journey of figuring out, who am I as a mother? Who am I as a wife, as a friend, as a family member, as a career person? Who am I? It's a very,
Mhm.
soul changing experience. And I wonder with this podcast if this is something that you've experienced yourself and what you've seen from other people that you've spoken to. Is this, this shift of all of a sudden my old life no longer suits me and I need to seek out something different?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it, honestly, is that like I think everybody who I've interviewed so far and everybody who's kind of been through this, because I think you get to a point in life where something happens. It could either be something tragic, like the death of a loved one, or something that changes within you as far as like, you know, your career, having a child. I know that that was like a life-changing moment for me. But even before I kind of got to that point, there was this moment where, you know, there's just like this feeling of emptiness in a sense, or like feeling like you're stuck. And it it just really kind of opens your eyes to like everything that you have been doing up to that point. It may have served you in a way and was beneficial, but it's not exactly something that you see yourself doing in the future or for the long term. And so I know that like having kids for me too, like that was a huge shift, right? Like I remember back when I was in college, I was like, there's no way I would ever be a stay-at-home mom. I could never do that. And yet here I am. I quit my corporate job. I think this was actually the first week, and I'm I'm doing the stay-at-home mom thing, and also like you know doing my podcast and my coaching and everything like that. But um, really just focusing on being there with my kids. And that, I guess, experience of having the kids and of feeling that shift within myself of, you know, this is way more important to me than this career was. Um, it really kind of gets you thinking about like what it is to to really be you, to really feel into like who you are as a person as opposed to what everyone has kind of told you you should be.
Yeah, and at the crux of it, right? Is when I think back to previous generations, even if something no longer suited them or didn't feel right, they did it anyway. They just sort of
Hmm.
lived with that uncomfortable or that unhappiness. That was just how things were done. Whereas I
Yeah.
feel like there's this big shift in, with millennials and Gen Z in particular. We'll probably see it with Gen Alpha and Beta and whatnot, but it's that. We are leaning into our intuition a little bit more and what makes sense for
Hmm.
us, as opposed to doing things the way they've always been done. And that's not just in careers, it's true in parenting as well, right? Like there's this whole concept of
Yeah.
cycle breaking of, no matter how that trauma was passed down to you from generation to generation, that it can end with you and you can change that
Hmm.
cycle. And that's something that I've tried to do with my parenting too, is recognizing what triggers me, how would my mom have responded, how would her mother have responded, and what can I do differently in this moment to sort of break that cycle. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you bring up a great point with like the cycle breakers because I feel like that's like a huge part of what a lot of millennials are doing, right? Um, and it's it is interesting too because it's like every generation has something that they're doing to kind of push us forward as a society, right? And I think that's one big part of like our generation. If you think about astrology, it's the people who are born in the Pluto and Scorpio era. Like that's essentially what we're doing is we're going and doing that deep inner work. We're going and uncovering these patterns that need to be shifted and completely transformed so that the people who come after us don't have to go through that again.
And
Um, Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm curious what your family's response has been like to this, because I think there's a lot from, the Gen Xers, the baby boomers. There is a lot of guilt on their part and also defensiveness, that if you choose to do
Mhm.
things differently, that you're implying they did it the wrong way. And I don't think that that's necessarily true. They did the best they could with the information they had at the time,
Right,
right? And
right.
things are different now. So I'm curious what that has been like for you with family members as you try to change the patterns.
Um, it's been a little bit of a challenge, as you could expect, right? I think I've definitely gotten a couple comments from like my parents of, oh, this is the way that we did it, and you guys are fine. I'm like, well, no, not really. I mean, there's a lot that I'm working through because of that, and that's not something that I necessarily want to pass on to my children. And so, I think they are kind of like coming to terms with it in a sense as well. But also don't fully understand. And I don't expect them to either. I will never kind of force that expectation upon anybody else who's not really ready to kind of understand or feel that or really get into that because it's a little bit of a slippery slope, right? Like you start going down that path and you really start to go down there. Um, and and so it's just giving them a little bit of grace and then understanding that, what am I okay with? What am I not okay with? And where am I drawing those boundaries so that, I'm protecting myself, my kids, and everything that I want to build moving forward. And so they're not going to get it. I know that they're not. Um, I think my mom still doesn't really understand, the coaching thing, or really like why I want to well, okay, never mind. My mom is a little bit more understanding of staying home with the kids. My dad, on the other hand, he hasn't said anything directly, but I know that I think there's a part of him that's a little disappointed. Um, I was always, the overachiever in the family growing up, the one that got grades, went to a good school, that sort of thing. And so, and he got a lot of pride out of that. And I think when I told him that I left my job to stay at home with the kids, he kind of just sat there in silence and was like, okay. um, and I don't know that he'll ever really understand that, and that's okay.
That is a huge, sign of how well evolved you are as a human, because I feel like we naturally want to please our parents. That is something that is really ingrained in us, and it's hard to be okay with not pleasing them, right? Like how did you
Yeah.
come to that ability to be like, you know what? He's probably never going to understand it, and that's his journey.
Yeah, it's been a lifelong thing, I think, honestly. Um, I think there have been a lot of little things along the way that have kind of led up to this point of, you know, knowing that every decision that I make is not necessarily going to be understood by them or not necessarily approved by them. And I definitely have a lot of like people pleasing tendencies. That's like something that I've worked through, right? And um, I think it's just something that kind of came with practice in a sense where, kind of building up that mental fortitude that, everything that I do is, or I guess other people's opinions about what I do is not necessarily a reflection of whether or not it's the right thing to do. Because that's going to vary for different people. And I know that everybody's kind of on their own path and um, you're not going to be able to please everyone. And that's okay.
Yeah, it's kind of that whole let them theory, right? Like let them have their reaction, let them think what they want to think. You can only
Yeah.
control what you can control, right?
Yeah.
Unless
Yeah.
Mercury is in
I
retrograde.
definitely was. Sorry, what was that?
Unless Mercury is in retrograde, then there's not so much you can control.
Yeah, you never know what'll happen then.
Yeah, that's actually, I would love to chat about that for a second because I feel like this is something that is kind of trendy now on social media. Like when Mercury is in retrograde, people just blame everything on it. But, maybe you can explain what that means. When people say Mercury's in retrograde, I don't think people even know what the heck
Mhm.
they're talking about, really.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a great question. And it's probably it happens the most often. Mercury goes retrograde, I think 3 to 4 times a year. And it's usually for about a month at a time. But essentially what happens is like Mercury, usually it's like looking like it's going one way, right? Most of the time. And then during retrograde period, what the planet actually does is it looks like it is going backwards because it kind of shifts its orbit around Earth. But outside of that is Mercury is the planet of communication. It rules technology, rules like written things, anything related to communication. And so usually what happens in Mercury retrograde is like it's like a time to essentially review things. It can lead to misunderstandings between people. It can lead to, I've heard of even travel delays too. I know there was a time period where I traveled during Mercury retrograde and had a lot of travel issues because Mercury is the sign that also rules the third house, which is related to like short distance travel. So think domestic. Um, but yeah, it's interesting to see like I think a lot of people fear Mercury in retrograde or even whenever any of the other planets are in retrograde. But really, what it is an opportunity to kind of review those themes in your life. Really take the time to actually review things. So it's like if you're signing a contract or something, you want to actually review it, like instead of, just quickly brushing over it like you normally would. And what happens is when people don't do that, challenges can come up. And that's just kind of reinforcing that idea of, taking your time to actually look at it and to actually review it instead of just doing what you normally do.
Yeah, I mean, the most recent Mercury in retrograde, I had a whole bunch of podcast recordings booked because that's what I do. Like I'm a podcast producer, and we had so many
Hmm.
technical difficulties that week with like
Yeah.
different clients in different locations all over the planet. Like it wasn't just local, and it was too much to be a coincidence, And like even recordings that I wasn't present on, they were recording separately. They had an issue, so it wasn't me. Like it was I didn't
Mhm.
realize until somebody towards the end of that week was like, "Well, Mercury is in retrograde." And I was like, because one thing that some people have said is that like, well, if you believe something is going to happen, you're going to start to see it, right? Like kind of if you buy a
Yeah.
Honda Civic, you're going to see nothing but Honda Civics on the road all the time because you notice them.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
my sort of counter to that is I'm someone who reads my horoscope every day, but I always read it at the end of the day. I don't read it at the beginning
Yeah.
of the day because I don't want it to influence what choices I may or may not make. But I'm always astounded at the end of
Hmm.
the day when I read it how accurate it is. And to me, that
Yeah.
is just wild because you can't say that I read it and then made choices to make that, you know, come true, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that idea too. I've started doing that as well, is like reading it at the end of the day and then using that as a point of reflection as
Hmm.
opposed to a guiding point, because I think astrology can sometimes be used as a crutch sometimes, and um it's it's not necessarily supposed to dictate your life. It's just supposed to give you a little bit more context and a little bit more information to kind of help guide you along the way. And so I love the reviewing of it afterward instead of starting your day out with it.
Yeah, and it's also it is partially a belief system as well, right?
Mhm.
I would never make fun of somebody for their religion, for being Christian or Jewish or Muslim or their faith or what they believe, but I feel like we're so quick to judge people who have sort of alternative views and beliefs, like, astrology and horoscope and that kind of stuff. Even magic, there's this fear
Mhm.
of the unknown, I think. If you don't understand it, it's wrong.
Mhm.
And that, I think, is wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. It's really interesting. Like, I think the thing that I've kind of come to terms with too is that like a lot of people just don't understand things fully, and they just hear little snippets or they see what's popular on like the TV or movies or things like that that are don't always portray things in the best light. And so it's like that fear really comes from not understanding it. And I think the same sort of thing with like astrology. It's like people don't understand, like they think it's just their sun sign when in reality it is so much more than that. And so yeah, it's just I wish that more people would be more open to learning about and understanding things. And that's kind of what I aim to do with like my podcast too, is like bring on different people with different backgrounds that can kind of talk about like in more depth about who they are, what they do, why they do it, like bring more details into the picture so that people can understand and it's no longer like a scary thing.
I think it's true also of a lot of things, not just astrology, but even science, sort of bring it full circle
Yeah.
from how we started this discussion. But
Yeah.
if people don't understand how something like a vaccine works, they're
Mhm.
going to be fearful and mistrustful, and not want to, you know, vaccinate their children, which leads us to things like measles epidemics and things like that. But just because you don't understand something doesn't mean you can't understand it. There is a way to communicate things in a way that makes sense to people. And I think maybe that's where, if we're going back 5 years to the start of the pandemic, where the scientific community, I think, has room for improvement is their communication strategy, is like figuring
Yeah.
out ways to make things accessible and understandable to the average person who the highest level of science they've probably achieved is like grade 7 or 8, science
Mhm.
in junior high. Like most people are not, doctors or engineers or biologists. Like you need to be able to, I don't want to say dumb it down, but bring it to like
Mhm.
regular human understanding. And just because you don't understand something doesn't mean it's not true or wrong, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that is a really important point. It's like meeting somebody where they're at in helping them understand what it is you're trying to portray or convey is really important, because not everyone's going to have the same background, not everyone's going to have the same base level of knowledge, and so you can't really expect other people to understand you or what you're trying to say if you don't kind of get on their own the same level. Um, and so it's just communication, right? Coming back to Mercury. um, just being able to communicate with other people in a way that makes sense is helpful.
Susan Gates can be found at her website, avoidingaverage.org. She is the person to talk to if you're feeling lost or stuck, or you just need a little bit of direction and or accountability in your life through some one-on-one coaching. You can follow her on Instagram at Soul Coach Susan. You can also listen to her podcast, and you should, at Avoiding Average, Living Life Beyond the Ordinary. It's on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts, and the link is below in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time today, Susan. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Robin.
you like what you heard today, make sure you follow and subscribe to Rebel Mom Boss with Robin Flynn wherever you get your podcasts. Oh, and make sure to leave a review because that's how other moms will find the podcast too. Until next week.